Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today I want to talk about Demons of the Punjab. Now, I'm not going to be reviewing the episode. I've done that fairly recently. I want to talk more about this episode and why it fascinates me, why I find it interesting, because I do find it just a really neat episode. It does some really cool stuff. I actually consider it to be the only modern Doctor Who pure historical, and I do consider it to be a pure historical. I know some people might not, and I know what they're saying, because a pure historical is usually defined as a story where the only aliens involved are the Doctor and maybe the TARDIS team. But this episode really does flow like a Hartnell pure historical, if you think about it. I think this might be the closest we've gotten to a Hartnell pure historical, except maybe the Highlanders and Black Orchid. But we really don't get episodes like Demons of the Punjab, because Demons of the Punjab is a pure historical by the definition of how we usually define the structure of a pure historical, disguised as a pseudo-historical. Now, I touched on this when I did my review of it, but the more I think about it, the more I am fascinated by this episode. It's very well written. Keep in mind, this episode is not written by Chris Chibnall. Let's bring that up right now. It's not a Chris Chibnall episode. It's written by a guy, I believe his name is Vinay Patel. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. He's a British Indian writer. He also co-wrote Fugitive of the Jadoon, but he did this one himself, and it's really, it's really good. It won all sorts of awards. I know it was nominated for a BAFTA, and it does a lot of neat things because a pure historical, it harkens back to the William Hartnell historicals, which of course main goal was to educate, because Doctor Who was originally more of a children's show. So you had the historical episodes to educate. And of course back then in Hartnell's run, you really didn't tamper with the past. It was, one of the big things about the Aztecs is the Doctor trying to explain to Barbara, you cannot change the past. He has that whole speech about you can't change the past, not one line. Believe me, I know, I've tried. It's the best part of the whole episode, with Barbara trying to change things for the better and the Doctor having to explain to her that history has to play out the way it's supposed to. And Demons of the Punjab really follows that. Now, it doesn't do it by saying history is immutable, which the original Hartnell-Era of Doctor Who might have implied at first. No, it doesn't try to say that. It doesn't even try to say that it's a fixed point. It uses the plot device of Yaz having to be careful because she's dealing with her family line, her grandmother, and the potential that she might cause a negative butterfly effect and erase herself out of existence, which is something the Doctor tells her, because the Doctor doesn't even want to go there at first, and then the Doctor wants to leave when things start getting dicey, and the Doctor warns her at one point, be careful, where you tread, you are walking on your own history. And so it basically uses the framing device for the plot of Yaz having to be careful and the Doctor having to be careful not to accidentally erase Yaz from existence, to give us a reason why we're in a situation where history is immutable, where you can't change it, where it's not malleable, where it is basically a fixed point without it being actually that. It gives us an excuse where the Doctor ends up in a situation where she can't change history. She can't save Prim, because that would, Yaz's grandmother would have never left and met Yaz's grandfather and got married and had a family, etc., etc., etc. History would be changed. So the Doctor is basically in like a First Doctor story where they're caught up in events and then they have to get out of events, because that's pretty much how the Hartnell historicals were. You look at the Reign of Terror, you look at the Aztecs, you look at the Crusade, and to an extent the Romans, even though the Doctor does inadvertently give Nero the idea for the fire. And they all boil down to the Doctor and the TARDIS team get caught up in events, more so than they intended, and they have to get themselves back out of the events while history still plays out. We see that in the Crusade. We see that in the Aztecs. They get in, stuff happens, they get caught up, they get out, history goes on. That is most Hartnell historicals. Now, in modern Who, with most pseudo-historicals, there's an antagonist. There's a villain that's either in the past causing problems, whether they're just in the past causing problems because that's where they are, or they're in the past causing problems because they're trying to change history. There's usually some villain that's doing bad things, and the Doctor has to stop them. He has to keep history from being disrupted, or he has to stop them because he's the Doctor. So it's the Doctor being the protagonist, the villain being the antagonist, and the Doctor has to stop them. That's most pseudo-historicals, even going back to the Time Meddler. But if you look at Demons of the Punjab, the structure of the story is much more like a pure historical than it is a pseudo-historical, because there is no main antagonist, it turns out. It's just history playing out the way history sadly does. And that's another way this story resembles a Hartnell-Era story, because it goes back to the original intention of the historicals, and it educates. It teaches. I was not aware of the partition of India and Pakistan. Like, I knew faintly when Pakistan was formed and all of that, but very faintly. Like, this whole event in 1947, I was basically unaware of. Enough to where I can say I was unaware of it, other than knowing Pakistan formed. Again, not much knowledge. And I certainly never realized it was such a violent affair with around 14 million people migrating, and about 1 million people, I think, estimated to have died. 1 million! 1 million! That's a staggering number. Estimated to have died. I think that was the mortality rate. That's insane. And so you realize how this is probably especially for British people, a little dark moment in their history. And definitely a very violent moment, to where India and Pakistan still to this day have hostility toward each other, to this day. So I was unaware of this. So the episode educated me on that by telling it in an interesting story. So once again, going back to that original Doctor Who mandate of the Hartnell-Era to educate about history. And it's a fascinating read, actually. Before I started the video, I was reading up on the partition of India in 1947. And just to see how violent and bloody it was, sadly. So it follows that there. And then the episode tricks you into thinking it's a pseudo-historical by introducing the other aliens. And what they actually are is a red herring, a complete red herring, to throw the Doctor off and us as the audience off. Because this is the type of historical we're used to. Especially if you're younger, if you're a modern Who fan, that's the kind of historical you're used to. There are these bad alien assassins. And the holy man has died. The alien assassins who, to be granted with their alien design, look violent. Which again kind of plays into that Galaxy 4 trope of don't judge a book by its cover. Again, hearkening back to the Hartnell-Era, which the whole lesson of Galaxy 4 was the evil, I say evil without even thinking about it. The ugly, unpleasant aliens are the good aliens, whereas the very attractive blondes are the evil ones, which I could have told them, but that's another story. So once again, a lesson from the Hartnell-Era. You see the aliens and they look like they could be violent, deadly assassin aliens. Easy to believe by their look. To find out they're not assassins anymore because they were away doing all the assassin stuff. Their world was destroyed. So now they just go and they observe. They're only there to observe. They are the first Doctor in the TARDIS team from back in the Hartnell-Era. That's all the Doctor usually wanted to do, was look and observe and learn. They just ended up getting caught up in events most of the time. But if a pure historical is defined by aliens interfering with history and stuff like that, then these aliens don't do that. They're literally there to do nothing but watch. To be outside observers looking in. That's the only reason they're there, literally. That's their plot in the story. But the story is made in such a way as to trick us to thinking it's a pseudo-historical. Thinking they're the villain is the red herring of the story. It tricks the Doctor and it tricks us. The Doctor spends most of the episode, because they used to be assassins, trying to stop them. just to have the rug pulled out from under her and us as the audience to find out that's not what they're there for at all. They're only there to watch. And then, right like an actual First Doctor story, history plays out. The villain of the story is history, is actual factual history and the tragedy of what happened there in 1947 as we see through Prim. And the scene at the end when he's talking to his brother and the people on horseback is such a well done scene. The acting is so on point there when Prim is trying to reason with him because he doesn't think he'll get shot. I mean, he gets Yaz's grandmother and the other lady with her out of there at least first, but he doesn't realize just how badly things have gotten until the one guy like cocks the gun and he looks at him and that way he does that. Really? Really? The way he does that line is fantastic. And then he talks about, in the war, we fought together. We made a great team. They used to be allies, compatriots, and now they've turned into enemies. I mean, this is literally brother against brother here. Brother against brother. Which is interesting symbolism for what happened there with people turning on each other like that. It's a really well done scene. And the villain is, the actual antagonist is just history itself, the tragic, bloody history. So what you have there is the Doctor not being able to affect events, much like in the Hartnell-Era, but for here, the reason for that is if she does, Yaz will cease to exist. So she has to let history play out. Sadly, the Doctor is in one of those situations where she can't do anything, even though she thought she could earlier in the story because she thought the assassins were the villain. But at the end of the day, she can't. She just has to leave and take Yaz back, and history has to play out the way it does when the Doctor leaves in the First Doctor era. When the TARDIS team and the First Doctor leave, like in the Crusade, in the Aztecs, in the Reign of Terror, history simply unfolds the way history unfolds. And that's what happens here. They don't stop the partition. They don't stop the massacre. When they leave, history unfolds the way it's supposed to. This is the closest we've gotten to a First Doctor Hartnell historical in a long time. And the only time we've gotten what I consider to be a pure historical in Modern Who. Now, and I do consider this a pure historical. Even though there is another alien group in it, again, they're literally there just as observers. And that fascinates me with this episode. And more I come to appreciate it. Series 11 doesn't have a lot going for it, but I like Ghost Monument, I like Kerblam, and I really like this episode. The story itself is good, but just the things it does. The fact it harkens back to the First Doctor era. The writer does such a good job to it. The fact it touches on what Doctor Who originally was, the original vision for Doctor Who, more so than most of the stuff in the Russell T Davies era, most of the stuff in the Stephen Moffat era. This is Doctor Who at its kind of original intent. Because, a lot of times people will review a Modern Who episode, even I've done it, where I say it doesn't feel like Doctor Who, and most of you know what I mean. But it's a very much a blanket statement because even classic Who changed. The McCoy era doesn't feel like the Pertwee era. Doctor Who evolved and changed even in classic Who. I've talked before about how I have to mentally shift gears sometimes when I'm going from an 80s story to a 60s story or a 60s story to an 80s story. I have to mentally swap gears, especially if I've just watched one and I'm going to the other. But if you want to get to Doctor Who in its purest form, its original form, it's Hartnell. You have to watch Hartnell because that was the original show, the original vision for the show. And I like Demons of the Punjab because it really does connect with that original vision that Verity Lambert and Sidney Newman had for the show. And the structure of the episode really follows that. Whether or not you're a fan of Whittaker or not should not apply to what I'm talking about here. And Whittaker in the episode is fine. I don't think she's bad. I think she has moments. I forget what I said exactly in my review, but I don't think she's bad in this episode. Again, your opinion of her is irrelevant to the point I'm making. It's the actual episode itself and its structure and its flow and what it does and its themes and its purpose that fascinate me because we don't get that in Modern Who. So for all of the bad things I say about Series 11, this is definitely a shining beacon and a great example of not only Whittaker era Doctor Who, but of Doctor Who going back to its original intent. And it's just a great episode of television. in my opinion. I just kind of wanted to do a video on that because it had been rattling around in my head, and I simply wanted to explain why, in my opinion, Demons of the Punjab is a pure historical, and I wanted to defend that opinion by saying it follows the structure of a Hartnell pure historical episode. So I want to know what you think of this video. It's been really hard for me to get my point across. I apologize. It took me, this is my third attempt at this video. It's been really hard to get what's up here out properly. I hope I have. I hope I've made the point I'm trying to make. But I'd like to know what you think. I'd like for you to comment down below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Especially if you can get past it being a Whittaker-era episode. I think some Doctor Who fans have that knee-jerk reaction of, it's a Whittaker episode, and just immediately tuning out mentally. And that's really not fair. It's a really good episode, and I would highly recommend that every Doctor Who fan watch it. So I'd like to know what you think. Comment down below and share your thoughts on my opinion of this story and what you think of this story. Other things to do, don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button and the bell for notifications so you never miss out on another video. We are almost at 1,000 subscribers. I'm so excited. I think last time I looked it was like 988. I'm so excited, so fired up. I appreciate each and every one of you. It's been so much fun watching the channel grow over the past 2 or 3 years that I've been working on it. It's really making my day. So if you want to support me on that, don't forget to click the subscribe button. I also have a Patreon if you would like to support me on that. There's a link to that down in the description below as well. My entry-level tier is only $2 a month. There's several different tiers there to choose from, and it really does help me keep the bills paid. I want to give a shout-out to some of my top-tier patrons, Stephen Crane, Colin Coney, and Finn Perkins. I appreciate their support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. It really means a lot. I have a P.O. box if there's anything you would like to send me to look at and review, and a link to my Amazon wish list is down there as well. Most importantly, thank you for watching.